I'm Primal Piggy. Thank you for joining us for another BDSM United podcast in our new and improved slave training series. Let's briefly talk more about what is the difference between perhaps a DS relationship and an MS relationship. What makes an MS relationship, a master slave relationship, unique? It's important to know because, like we said in a previous podcast, that the slave training is really for master slave relationships, but you can, to a limited degree, you can apply it to dominant submissive relationship as well. So while a dominant has a strong influence over their submissive, generally a master has absolute authority over slave. A submissive gives limited control over certain aspects of their lives to their dominant, but retains enough personal autonomy that they may say no to a request from their dom or their dame that they simply don't want to perform. Now, while a decision based upon their own will would upset and possibly annoy the dom, it would seldom be viewed as relationship ending. To become a slave, however, a person gives authority over themselves to their master, who now controls every aspect of their lives. For many, this person is now considered owned property, this slave. A person does this for a variety of personal reasons that are generally hard to generalize. And in this setting, slaves' refusal to carry out an order that is within their power to fulfill would be seen as a willful act of disobedience and may be taken by master as a breach of the relationship's foundation. That is, slave is to serve and to obey. Willful disobedience could easily be grounds for the slave's dismissal. The ownership issue is what separates dominant and submissive structures from master slave structures. Slave Marcia, during a keynote address at the Southwest Leather Conference in 2003, said it this way. This is a good quote here. She said, "I believe that masters and slaves are people who are willing to commit themselves to living in a way that's radically different from what our society teaches is right and appropriate. As people who choose to live in consensual master-slave relationships, would defy some of the beliefs our society holds most dear. The belief that independence is the key to happiness, and that the desire to control another person is the heart of abuse. It takes tremendous commitment to follow a path that at best is likely to be misunderstood by those around you." Now, further talking about motivations, in the opinion of Dr. Bob Rubel, whose work we often use as a textbook for teaching power exchange relationships, he says structured relationships are very appealing for a variety of reasons. These are some of the reasons he gives. He says they encourage mindful ways of thinking and behaving. You're now in a relationship in which you and your partner are both concerned about such concepts as purpose, intent, and mindfulness. Often, structured relationships enable us to uncover things about ourselves. It's about self actualization, about confronting what is next for us and working through our own psychological blocks. These relationships bring out the best and sometimes the worst in people. You'll have the time of your life if you're an empathetic and farsighted leader. If you're not so gifted, you have the opportunity of a lifetime to change yourself to be happier in your own skin. Structured relationships take a huge amount of work. At some point, you're likely to find yourself wondering if it's all worth it. It's at this point that the master must honestly assess whether or not he or she is willing to pay the price to re energize the relationship so it operates as it was initially designed. For many, this is the point at which master confronts this key question. Is it in the slave's best interest to sustain the illusion that the relationship itself is functional? Finally, Dr. Bob says, and we agree, Structured relationships, well, they're traditional. Before you even start training, you might ask yourself, what's your personal purpose of the proposed training? That's a lot of P's. What's your personal purpose of the proposed training? It takes all kinds to make a horse race, goes the old saying. In MS relationships, that can mean that you and your partner may not learn the same way, and that what motivates one of you does not motivate the other. So here are some topics to consider. What type of slave are you even seeking? Do you want a personal assistant, perhaps a companion, or is it just a sex slave? That's valid too. Is this a new slave or an experienced slave in a relationship? And to what extent is the training that you're even considering? What's motivating your slave to serve you? Uh, taking is it taking from the book Real Service by Joshua Tenpenny and Raven Caldera? Is it transactional service, devotional service, positional service? These are slave motivations, and you can learn about them by going to that book. But what is motivating them to serve you? It's a good question to ask. Um, Now, here are some additional planning that you might find helpful in establishing your household. Identify your purpose. This is somewhat of a mission statement, and this is the statement or statements to describe why your family exists. It's basic purpose, and we're using terms household and family. We're borrowing those from the leather community, but there's basically it's you and your slave or your slaves. It's anyone who's involved in your structured relationship. And what are you and your slave all about? Are you focusing primarily on yourselves and your relationship? Are you interested in or intending to give something back to the community? If you intend to give back, what are you giving back? Your time, your service, your money, your wisdom? These statements will change somewhat over the years. I know personally for my submissive and me, uh, pre pandemic, we gave a lot to the community in running local munches and events. And now post pandemic, we're focusing on education a lot differently, more about podcasting and reaching just a different audience in a different way. And uh, our BDSM education is a big part of our relationship as well. We do focus sometimes a lot on ourselves, but BDSM education is one of our major kinks, and we run this page and or a lot of different pages in this podcast and a lot of different things. So that's definitely the BDSM community is definitely part of our relationship dynamic. Now, select the goals that your family must reach to accomplish its mission. Goals are general statements. They're not necessarily details, but they're just general, broad statements about what you need to accomplish to meet your purpose or mission. And they address the major issues or constraints that you will face in the process. Now, once you um, set goals, goals are just dreams if there's no action behind them. So you definitely want to identify specific approaches or strategies that must be implemented to reach each goal. These are actionable steps. These are actionable plans to implement each strategy. And you definitely want to also monitor and update the plan. Business planners, they regularly reflect on the extent to which their business goals are being met and whether action plans are being implemented. Perhaps the most important indicator of family success comes from the comments by friends who notice positive changes in your life. And so, as we close up this podcast episode, let's just take a brief look at the role that love plays within your MS dynamic. There's not a general consensus about what role love plays. There's a lot of different opinions. Um, Now, we know that love is the steady state emotion that takes over after the honeymoon, new relationship energy, in love stage kind of wears out a little. This is probably the most commonly accepted viewpoint for love based MS. That many masters feel that if you're going to put all of the time and effort into training a slave with whom you'll spend lots of time, they want to be submerged in a loving relationship with that person. So love is oftentimes important. If you're demisexual, or the any of you are demisexual in the relationship, then this is definitely important for you. Many slaves say that they'd never go through what they're going through if their master didn't love them. Some believe, though, that love contaminates the master's ability to make emotionally pure decisions. When the MS relationship is based on service and obedience as opposed to being based on love, two issues come into play. Whether master's love for slave causes master to limit the kinds of orders they give, and whether the slave is complying with an order out of love or out of obedience. It's kind of mucky waters, and it's kind of hard to determine. Um, but there's love, and then there's love. The word itself represents a concept, not a practice. The way a 16-year-old explains love is a worlds apart from how a 60-year-old would explain it. Your own understanding and understandings of love change as you gain more personal experience. But loving MS relationships differ substantially from girlfriend boyfriend relationships, as though the latter doesn't involve power exchange or authority transfer. There can be substantial differences between a master's love and a slave's love as well. The master is likely to love the slave rather than be in love with the slave, and the slave is more likely to fall in love with the master. This situation where master loves the slave and the slave is in love with the master can lead to some misunderstandings and stress unless they're discussed openly and with truthfulness. It may be useful to discuss different forms of love with your prospective slave. And that's just really the point that we wanted to make. You want to find out what role love plays in your relationship dynamic. If it does play one at all, it's completely valid. If you have a relationship dynamic that is not love based and is just based on service and obedience. So you definitely want to iron that out as well in the planning stage. I'm Primal Piggy. Thank you for listening to this, another in our slave training podcast series. Uh, if you're listening on your favorite platform, please leave a like, a subscribe, a review. It allows you to connect with us, and it also allows other adults to connect with these valuable BDSM educational materials. When everyone is educated, it makes our community and our BDSM lifestyle a lot better. So thank you for playing your part in that process. It's been a joy speaking with you today. Be sure to find all of our resources at bdsmunited.com, and I'll talk to you again soon.